Gozer the Gozerian, good evening. As a duly designated representative of the city, county, and state of New York, I order you to cease any and all supernatural activity and return forthwith to your place of origin or to the nearest convenient parallel dimension. Here's your look at the new Hasbro. This is the Ghostbusters Plasma Series Race Stanz. Ray Stantz is the heart of the team. Ray's ready and more than willing to bust some ghosts. Before we go ahead and have a closer look at Ray Stantz, the first thing I'm going to do is take my Ultra Measure 5000, that is my tape measure of choice, and we're going to figure out how tall the figure stands, should you be in the market of picking these ones up for yourself. Still squats in the way of finding these in local stores. I would love to have been able to pick up the real Ghostbusters figures. I would equally love to have been able to pick up the Plasma Series figures at local retail, but nothing. Nothing here in Canada. I ended up actually picking this setup over at Big Bad Toy Store, and eventually they did arrive, and that's what's led us to this dance. I'm not a very good dancer. Nonetheless, though, Ray Stantz stands 5.7 inches in height, and that, centimeters, works out to have the figure be 14.7, a little over 14.5 centimeters tall. Bringing in the other Ghostbusters that we've looked at, here is, of course, Peter Venkman. First figure that we had a look at. Let's get him to stand properly. There we go. And we can also bring in Egon Spengler. Such the creative names they came up with for the cast of characters in Ghostbusters. But this is what the figures look like thus far. We still have to look at, of course, Winston Zeddemore. And then there's still going to be Zuul, Dana Barrett, and of course we're going to have a look at Gozer. So there's going to be still a couple of videos coming your way. But this is just to kind of give you the idea of what these figures all look like together. Technically, I wanted to look at the trio first, before, of course, they put out the want ads and Winston Zeddemore answered the call. Oh, I see what I did there. I would have normally said that these figures all share the exact same body. One thing I will talk about when it comes to Ray Stantz is they have slightly tweaked his body, at least in his torso. So there'll be some interesting things to mention there. But these are the figures that we've looked at thus far, one short away from finishing off the quartet, the full Ghostbusters team. As also mentioned in the other figure reviews that we've had a look at, I don't have any of the Matty Collector Ghostbusters, parted ways with those so long ago. But I still do have the Diamond Select versions. So there is Ray Stantz, very much taller Ray Stantz than the one that we get here released from Hasbro. There's still something to be said, I have to admit, for the design of the Diamond Select releases. They have a lot more details going for them. I will say, to the credit at least of the Hasbro releases, there's a lot more color and richness to their face. Their features stand out a little bit better. Whereas I do still feel like the head sculpts are, for the most part, decent on Diamond's releases. A lot of the faces just seem washed out. There's just not enough contrast of colors, and the facial features just don't stand out as well. Looking at Ray's accessories, he comes included with one of the front legs for, of course, Vince Clortho, one of the Terror Dogs. The fact that they would actually list it specifically as Vince Clortho as the builded dog, as opposed to just simply calling it the Terror Dog, one would probably go then to the conclusion that they're probably going to do a second wave and essentially just give us Zuul as the Terror Dog as well. That's my thought, at least. Because if not, they would have simply just called it the Build a Terror Dog wave, or something along those lines. The front leg, unlike the hind leg, actually does have some bend in the elbow. You can rotate the lower leg section of the Terror Dog, whereas the hind legs, unfortunately, don't have any articulation up here. Sure, it does have it down here. It has it also in the bottom ankle section, but at least the front legs, not the hind legs, the front legs also have, like I said, that additional articulation. So it'll be interesting to see all this when it's put together. I've always been a big fan of the design of the Terror Dog, Vince Clortho or Zuul, your preference. I kind of really liked Vince Clortho because he had the larger horns, but still looking forward to getting this one all built up. We're going to be slowly building, it seems, as right now we're only really tackling the legs. Other accessories that come included with Ray is also his Proton pack. I certainly don't want to continue to do this, but bringing in the Diamond Select release just to show you the side-by-side comparison. It is still a smaller, more simplified version of the Proton pack, and while it's much easier to attach the neutrino wand to the side, I just feel like the Diamond Select one was just a lot more detailed. I mean, you can see the warning labels. I know we covered all this before. I've got one just roaming label. Just seems like it's been misplaced and it's now decided to move its way across the Proton pack. You can see it's a lot more detailed on the Diamond's release. But to the credits, and I've mentioned this already, I'm sure, at least the Hasbro release is a lot easier to peg into place. You just take that little square peg, line it up to the square hole, couldn't be any bit easier than this, and just plug it into place like that. One thing also to note as well with the Proton pack is, say for example, I bring in Egon Spengler, you can see how the circle down below of light is continuing to circulate and rotate around that circle. You can see it starts there, pops up there. Peters was over here, and I'm sure Winston Zeddemore, I think, is down here, or I think Peters was down there. Let's just grab the figure for a second. I've got him actually just over on the side here. Yeah, Peters starts here. I mean, this is things that we don't really need to spend a whole lot of time discussing, but the idea is that that red circle of light does travel around those 4 individual openings. So I don't know why they felt the need to do that, but it's something to note when you look at the figure. Adding the Proton pack to the back of Ray's Stance, you simply just grab the figure like so, spin him around, and you're going to attach it to that peg hole located on the back via something you would have expected to see from a G.I. Joe. One interesting thing about Ray's Stance, though, is if you look at the figures versus one of the ones that we had a look at before, Ray actually has a bit of a bulge. Yes, Hasbro actually has gone ahead and added a little bit of extra tummy for Ray's release figure versus what we actually got with Egon Spengler. The same thing actually applies for Venkman. Venkman has that still slender body, not super model bodies, but at least more average bodies. And then, like I said, Ray Stantz has a little bit more of the guts. So it's a nice little touch of detail. I'm happy to see that they actually added that. One downside, though, is with the Proton pack is it does cause a little bit more difficulty getting it to close around the portlier belly of Ray Stantz. Just going to take his arm, you're going to slide it straight through. You've seen this already, I know. And then you're just going to take the other end of the strap, feed it around his head, and then you're just going to attach it to the back. Before you attach it to the back, make sure you take the peg and plug it into the back of the hole. There we go, and just push it in. And then from there, you're just going to raise the arm up, and then you're going to do your best to attach the two. Now, because he, again, has that little bit of extra belly working for him, it sort of works against the idea of being able to attach the strap properly. When I do think I actually have it, stretching it across and fitting it over that peg, it seems prone to want to pop back off. I get the attention to detail, and I appreciate it was there, but it does cause a little bit of more issues, I would say, attaching that strap. You can kind of actually even get it underneath his belly and attach it that way as well, but it's just very difficult, especially for the fact that they've accounted for a little bit extra girth, I would say, on Ray's tummy tum-tum. So that's a little bit of an issue, just trying to get that to stretch it. I mean, at least it's softer plastic, so it does cause, it's a little bit easier to try to fit that across, but it still means a lot of times it's popping off, and luckily it hasn't developed any stress marks yet, but this might be one instance where I might have the difficulty of actually getting this to close shut. Needless to say, whatever his gained issues are with his weight, for a likeness on Ray's Stance, actually one other thing before we talk about his likeness. Of course, Ray also comes included with his Ecto goggles. The Ecto goggles are pretty much all one color, minus for the silver that's on the front of the lenses. Everything else is unfortunately one color. They didn't paint the back strap black, and nor would they have added any of the additional details on the sides, turning the knobs black, for example. It is sort of just all one color, this military green. And while I still appreciate the fact that they would have added the silver onto the ends of it, at the very least, I would have liked at least if they could have colored the back band and actually had that in black. You can fit it over top of Ray's head. Involves a little bit of stretching, and at least because, again, it's the material that they've used, it's a little easier to get it over his face. Once you clear his rather large hair, you can then either fit it over top of his eyes, or for most people's desired look for Ray, Just bring the strap up a little bit there, and you can actually have it sitting on top of his head. Now, one thing about let me just get it over top. He's got this big giant hair. There we go. Just fit it down. It's a lot easier to do it from the top than it is from the bottom. Just fit it on like that. I feel actually it's a better likeness to Ray Stantz, and more specifically Dan Aykroyd, when you have the Ecto goggles on top of his head. There's something about having it with it actually off that I feel it looks less like him. I don't know, that's a bit strange. Somehow, by adding the Ecto goggles, I feel it looks a better resemblance to Ray Stantz. That's my own personal opinion. Bringing in of course, Ray Stantz that we had a look at a long time ago from Diamond Select. You can see them side by side. I mean, really nothing faulting Diamond Select's initial release. That's not a bad looking Ray. Very long in the head, I would say. I mean, that's beyond the point of a 5 head. That's almost borderlining a 6 head. But at its time, it wasn't a terrible head sculpt. It seems perhaps a bit dated now when you compare it to, say, the more details that they were able to add to the Hasbro's release. But still, points I think should be given to Diamond for what they've done. I think most importantly, the Venkman figure from Diamond Select is one of the only figures from Diamond that I feel did it better than what we actually got from Hasbro's release. Needless to say, though, looking at the head sculpt, it's not really that terrible of a job of looking like Dan Aykroyd. Especially, again, when you incorporate the Ecto goggles, I feel it just looks a little bit more like him. The certain expression that they've given the character reminds me of when he's walking down the hallway of the hotel and he stops for a second to see that Slimer's feasting on the food cart at the side of the hallway. Just short of him having that little cigarette, which I guess obviously gearing this towards kids, they wouldn't have put that in anymore. But I mean, I would love to have seen, I think he actually had the cigarette if memory serves me correctly. I know, I think he did have the cigarette. If short of him actually having that in his mouth, I mean, I think that's almost the likeness that he has, that expression that he has when he first sees Slimer. Again, when you take the Ecto goggles off, I do feel like the hair is a little bit too big, and it doesn't quite look as much like Ray Stantz as I would have hoped. There's also a little bit of extra paint of brown that they've added to the top of his forehead. It should have actually been a little bit higher up, and those areas should have been flesh, but it kind of does add a little bit of extra fullness to his hair that I think pulls a little bit away from it looking more like him. Again, I would probably likely display him with the Ecto goggles myself. But as for the figure itself, we'll go ahead and take the neutrino wand and just attach it back to his proton pack, just to kind of get it out of the way. It's, again, a lot easier than what we were getting with Diamond's releases, because Diamond actually had to have it sit. Well, you've already seen it by now. I don't want to talk too much about that. Other things on Ray's Stantz that make him unique, other than, of course, the bulbous tummy, is he does have the little Ray Stantz or Stanz patch on the front of his jumpsuit. He has the same still Ghostbusters logo featured on the top of his shoulder. And pretty much all the other things on this figure are identical to, like, for example, we'll bring in Egon Spengler, because Egon does have also the tucked-in pants, are probably the best way to compare the two figures side by side. They do look like they are identical in bodies, short for the fact that the torso is a little bit different on Ray's Stantz. I wonder if they actually could use the same torso on Ray, that maybe as something they could use later on for, let's say, a Louis Tully. Because Louis Tully, I don't think, has the most, again, fit body form. They probably could use that same stomach section. But again, like looking at them side by side, there's nothing really different between them except for that torso. I know I already talked about that. He does have on the side a walkie-talkie that's not, sadly, it's not removable, so that's warning. He does have the same yellow tube that connects from the leg to the back of his belt. There it is right there. And again, like, all the details are the same. One thing I do like about these is certainly from a sense of being able to play with these, because obviously they're going to be geared towards kids and younger collectors, although, you know, again, there's going to be collectors of my age that are going to be sourcing these out. One thing I do like is that the elbow pads aren't separate. One thing that of course, the Diamond Select releases had, these were separate elbow pads. It just makes, like, moving their arms just a lot easier, you know, when everything is already attached and you don't have to worry about this shifting around on you. The gloves are done in a very shiny black. As well, could be said as well for the boots. The boots are also in a very shiny shiny paint, shiny black paint. I don't think it's obviously the coloring of the plastic. The plastic probably was just the exact same color that they used for the jumpsuit, this lighter off beige color. And then they probably just went ahead and painted in the boots. But the boots and the gloves do look nice. Nothing negative to say about those. The laces aren't painted in. They're basically sharing the exact same color as the rest of the boots, and that doesn't bother me at all. And like the other figures too, he does also have peg holes on the undersides of his feet. Looking at the articulation on Ray, his head rotates all the way around. It hinges up, it hinges down, it hinges right, it hinges left. His arms hinge out at a full 90-degree bend. There you go. It's just a bit strange. I don't know why you would ever... I mean, I would never display my figures like this. It's just to simply show you what the range of motion is. You don't really want to put them any bit higher than that, because that's going to be causing damage to the joint. But the arms do rotate all the way around. He has a swivel on the bicep that can rotate all the way around as well. A single and then double bend in the elbow, which is good because then you can actually make it look like they're pulling their neutrino wand or proton wands from the proton pack. You can actually get that pulled off. I would have been really disappointed if these figures only had a single hinge in the elbow, and luckily that's not the case. The figure also does have a rotation in the hand all the way around. You can hinge that back and forth. As for the upper torso, it's on a ball joint, like that. Ball joints on the legs, allowing the legs split. You're not going to get a full clearance on splits on this side, because again, all the stuff that's happening here with the hoses sort of get in the way, and of course you're going to be butting up against this as well. He has a swivel on the 3/4 cut of the thigh, basically 3/4 of the way up the thigh. That's why I say 3/4 of the 3/4 cut on the thigh. Double hinge on the knee, or double hinge on the knee. They're a little bit tighter on the joints there. And then for the feet are pretty much molded. Like this part of the boot is attached to this part of the leg. So you can't rotate it here, but you can still ankle pivot at the foot. You can hinge it up and down as well. So there's quite a bit of articulation as well there. I have to admit, I really wasn't going to be a big fan. I didn't think I was going to be a fan of Ray's Stantz. Him, much like Peter Venkman, I didn't think the likeness was really good there. I didn't feel it was close enough to look like Dan Aykroyd. And yet, the longer I have the figures in hand, where I've actually had a chance to kind of play around with them and just kind of get a feel for the figures before I hit record, I've actually started really warming up to this line. They're smaller, which is also one of the benefits of this particular line. They're not as tall as Diamond's releases of yesteryear. Superposable, yes. And the lighter colors on their costume make the colors of the figures more vibrant. Again, when you compare it, say, to the likes, let's just put the figure down here for a second again. Get his feet completely straight. There we go. If, again, you compare him, say, to the likes of the Diamond Select release with the horrible neutrino wands that just never stayed in place, I almost feel in a way still that these are more movie accurate colors, but it also caused the figures to look very dirty because they added so much of the additional wash over top of it. With the newer Ghostbusters stuff, one thing that works to their credit is that they're pretty bright looking figures. Again, and that kind of adds to the shelf appeal when you're looking to display these figures for yourself. One last thing I wanted to mention about Ray Stantz and how he does differ from the other two Ghostbusters that we had a look at before. Again, bring in Peter Venkman, and again, bring in Egon Spengler. Ray Stantz not only does differ in the torso area, having a slightly larger stomach, but his belt is also different. When we first had a look at Venkman, for example, you'll remember he does have that little peg that's located on his belt. Now, that will not serve much the purpose for necessarily Venkman, but it certainly did make a big difference when it came to Spengler, because you could take the PKE meter and you could attach it to the side of his belt in that hole. One thing that is different about Ray's Stantz, though, is that when you look at the figure, he doesn't actually have that hole located there at all. Instead, he has a rather useful-looking hook. Well, if you go ahead and you take the ghost trap that came included with Peter Venkman, you'll remember on the bottom of it, it was completely hollow. Well, that hook, you can actually take one of the ghost traps, you can either attach it at the top there, or you can actually just have it in the more open area down below. And that ghost trap actually just sits right on that hook. A very clever kind of Easter egg a bit in a way, because if you had collected Peter already, in likelihood you probably already would have collected Peter if you were looking to get all the Ghostbusters. It's interesting the fact that you would use an accessory that was from another Ghostbuster that you could put on display with Ray Stantz. Ray Stantz technically could have included a ghost trap, so that it would have then made sense why it would have been hooking onto the hook on his belt. But again, because it seems each one of these Ghostbusters only come with one accessory apiece, instead they decided to give him the more iconic look of the Ecto goggles. But if you did manage to pick up this guy, Dr. Venkman, you can most definitely use his ghost trap and hook it onto the front of Ray Stantz's belt, and that's pretty clever. One thing I wish Hasbro could have done more with their Ghostbusters line so far is throw additional accessories with each of the Ghostbuster team members. Each Ghostbuster, of course, gets his own Proton pack and Neutrino wand, and then only gets one accessory. Peter Venkman, of course, comes included with the Ghost Trap, Egon Spengler comes with the PKE meter, and Ray Stantz comes with the Ecto goggles. In comparison to the Diamond Select stuff, they were throwing accessories left, right, and center to all their members, so they had their own separate walkie-talkies, they had multiple PKE meters, and they had multiple Ghost Traps of different configurations. But I guess they did want to limit the amount of accessories that come included with each of the figures, so that, again, you can mix and match these if you wanted to, pulling the Ghost Trap, for example, from Venkman, and putting it on the belt of Ray Stantz. Again, I really like the touch that they added that little hook. Ray Stantz is a figure that I honestly didn't think I was going to like as much. In packaging, I don't feel he bared a good, strong resemblance to actor Dan Aykroyd. While my feelings haven't really changed about Peter Venkman's portrait, I do feel like I like the sculpting on the head here of Dan Aykroyd, or, of course, Ray Stantz. Is it a dead-on likeness? No, but it's pretty close. And again, looking at these newer figures, how there's a little bit more personality to their faces. Dates, I feel a little bit more the Diamond Select releases. That the face sculpts, the head sculpts were good for their time. But I do feel like these ones, short of Venkman, who I still feel like Diamonds did a better looking Venkman, I think these ones are better looking head sculpts when it's all said and done. They're a little bit smaller, yes, accommodating more to the idea of being action figures and not necessarily collectible figures like Diamond's releases were. I just hope that we do get ourselves more additional ghosts. I hope we get some more additional, of course, characters from the film. And I certainly do want to see also, one thing that Matty Collector did very well was incorporating a lot of additional accessories, like, for example, the containment unit. I would love to see maybe a containment unit released somewhere down the road, and of course, the Ecto 1 would be a nice touch as well. But let me know down below what you guys think in the comments section of the new Plasma series, Ray Stantz from the new Ghostbusters Hasbro line. Always like reading your comments down below. If you guys are new to this channel, maybe jumped on board during this video review and you're new here, hello, come on in. If you like the content that I'm putting out, there's a lot more content to check out. I think I'm coming up now to, if you can believe it, 10,000 videos. Now, I'm not just making that up. But if you look at the number of videos on this channel, there's about 10,000 videos, coming up to it at least. There's certainly a lot to check out if you, again, are new here. But make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, new member. Make sure you hit that bell notification. And make sure you keep your peepers peeled. I know it sounds gross, but you'll get used to it, because there's certainly going to be a lot of videos coming your way. We're still going to be looking at Winston Zeddemore, and we're still going to be looking at Dana Barrett, or Zool, and we're also going to be looking at Gozer the Gozerian. So there's a couple of videos for the Ghostbusters stuff still heading your way. And of course, sprinkled in there, we're going to be doing some other stuff as well. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.